Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. And this week we are once again sponsored by NordPass, which is kind of convenient because it ties in neatly to the first story that I wanted to talk about this week. The massive data breach that affected Uber last week. Before we get into it, remember you can go to nordpass.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get a 2-year NordPass premium plan, plus this time 4 months for free, all covered by NordPass's 30-day money-back guarantee. So what was it that happened to Uber? Why is it so funny? And how can NordPass prevent the same thing from happening to you? Well, technically Uber weren't really the victims of a hack. They were the victim of what's referred to as social engineering, although that's really just, in this case, a fancy term for describing, how can I put this? And this is kind of simplifying matters, but it is basically more or less what happened. Some 18-year-old called up an Uber employee and asked for his password. And we know they were an 18-year-old because after gaining administrator access to Uber's entire network, they not only stole vast amounts of sensitive customer data, but they also started sending dirty pictures to random Uber employees over their network. Now, amusing though that is, and it is, I can't help but feel that if the unfortunate idiot who was the victim of this social engineering prank had been using NordPass, it would never have happened. And I'm pretty confident about that, because in order to give somebody your password, you first have to be able to remember it. This is what his passwords would have looked like. So, good luck even remembering that, let alone being able to pass it on to somebody who's not supposed to have it. The whole point of having NordPass is that it randomly generates these unrememberable passwords for you and then fills them in for you so you don't have to remember them in the first place. Amongst the many other things that NordPass does, but that's probably the most useful and the one that it will be doing for you multiple times a day, every day. So head on over to nordpass.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get yourself 2-year NordPass premium plan, plus this time 4 months for free, all covered by NordPass's 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. Well, yeah, so when this video goes out, I'll probably be going straight back to bed in order to store up some energy for the Wrath of the Lich King Classic release that happens tonight, I think at 11 PM UK time. Yeah, I know, World of Warcraft, old news. But I think most people will probably agree that Wrath of the Lich King, their second expansion, was probably the best expansion they've ever had, and things just kind of slowly went downhill ever since. And I'm actually quite excited. Well, I remember the first time, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, when Wrath of the Lich King came out for real, trying to get my hands on a copy was a very frustrating experience, because this was back when, there were no digital downloads. I remember when the first expansion, the Burning Crusade, came out, you had to have a physical copy of the game. You couldn't pre-install it on Steam or on the Blizzard.net. I don't even think there was a Blizzard launcher at the time. It was that long ago. But you had to have a physical copy of the game on CD-ROM. And it came on multiple discs. I still actually have the boxed copies, but I didn't get a copy ready to go for the moment of launch, which happened say the game was released officially playable on the Saturday. That meant at midnight on the Friday you could start playing. And I remember there were a couple of guys in our guild. We had a dwarf priest by the name of Therixus. He's actually an Irish doctor with a practice in Scotland. Really nice guy. And one of our rogues, whose name I can't remember, they had managed to get a copy delivered the day before, so they had it all pre-installed and ready to go, and they could just start playing the second the clock struck midnight, and of course we couldn't. And we were all on TeamSpeak listening to them, insanely jealous of their experience. We're like, oh my god, look at the sky, wow, look at the skybox, it's amazing. And then they were linking loot from beginner quests in the first zone, Hellfire Peninsula, and it was better than all of the raid gear that we'd been bashing our heads against brick walls in order to farm in the years prior to this first expansion coming out, and we were so jealous. But I said that wasn't going to happen again when the next expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, came out. So obviously I was in the Navy at the time, and I was working at a place called Fort Blockhouse, which used to be HMS Dolphin, a submarine base in Gosport. And now it's the home of the Joint Service Medical Service, I suppose, the Army, Navy and Air Force medics, doctors and nurses and so on and so on. And I had found out what date Wrath of the Lich King was going to be released, and I had volunteered to do summer duties so that I would have all my summer leave saved up and plan to use my summer leave when Wrath of the Lich King came out, so I could, you know, be a real sweaty try-hard and just absolutely crack out that leveling experience. And I sat down and worked out my strategy. How am I going to get my hands on a copy? Because you could pre-order, and that was what had happened when the Burning Crusade came out 2-3 years previously. A couple of people, depending on who you ordered it from, sometimes you would get it the day of release, sometimes you would get it the day before, and the day of release basically meant it might turn up in the morning 8, 9, 10 hours after the actual expansion went live. So I thought, I'm not having any of that. And I looked at various different retailers that were going to be having copies. And obviously I didn't want to be standing in a queue for 4 hours outside Game or anything like that. None of the big video game retailers. They were going to be camped out like you wouldn't believe. But I found out that one of the supermarkets nearby, which was open 24 hours, had a copy, or was going to be selling copies, at midnight. And my friend Eddie drove me around an hour before to make sure, you know, if there was going to be a queue, we would be in it. And we went straight to the video game section. There was nothing on the shelves, and there was nobody else there. The place was deserted. It was 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday or something. So we went to the customer services desk and said, you know, this computer game, Wrath of the Lich King for World of Warcraft, it's an expansion. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to be selling copies here. They had no idea what we were talking about. But they asked around, and eventually somebody who had some idea of what video games were said, oh yeah, that's right, we've got 19 copies. No, you don't. Nobody orders 19 copies of anything. 20 copies, yeah. You ordered 20 copies, and then somebody who plays World of Warcraft snatched a copy, so you've only got 19 copies left. But that's fine, you know, you got 19 copies, there's only one of me. But they couldn't sell us, well, I say us, it was just me. Eddie wasn't interested. They couldn't sell me a copy until the stroke of midnight. So, okay, no problem. We'll be back. And we went and had a McDonald's, and then we came back, and half an hour to go, there's still nobody there. We're like, brilliant, fantastic. Well, we're in the supermarket, we'll do some late night shopping. And then at 10 minutes to midnight, we went back to the customer service desk, and they had sold every copy in the 10 minutes between our saying, you've still got copies, right? Yeah, we've still got all 19. And then us going and buying some stuff and then coming back, and we're still 10 minutes before midnight, and they'd sold all 19 copies to people who just turned up there and then. I was furious. Not to be outdone, however, and that was all. That was all of their copies, all 19. Right? They didn't have any more. It's not like I come back the next day and that was it. So Eddie took me home. Right, who else has a copy? Because, you know, all the big game retailers, forget it. They would have been sold out for hours at that point. But there was another smaller supermarket in Gosport that we hoped might have some copies. So 8 o'clock in the morning, the second they opened, we were there. And there were a few other people looking for a copy of Wrath of the Lich King, and they had 10 copies left, and I managed to get the second to last copy. And oh, it was amazing. Like I said, I think most people would agree it was the best expansion that World of Warcraft have ever had, and things had just kind of slightly gone, well, not slightly, but they've started to kind of go a bit downhill. Wrath of the Lich King, or Rash of the Itch King, as I like to call it, because I am really crap and my jokes suck. It really improved on the quality of life adjustments that had started with the Burning Crusade, because everybody talks about how amazing World of Warcraft was when it first came out, and the classic servers were very, very popular, but the thing is, it really wasn't. It was horribly unfriendly, horribly grindy by modern standards, and yet by the standards of the time, it really was massively user-friendly. It didn't punish you for trying to play like other games like EverQuest and Ultra Online did. I remember in Ultima Online, and you can argue whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. I can't even remember specifically why I was doing something. I can't even remember if there were quests in Ultima Online, but let's say for the sake of argument that they were, and there were some ogres that I needed to kill. And they were really, really tough. Whether or not that was just because I was a new adventurer and didn't have many skills, and just maybe ogres were really tough. But there was nothing to stop another player, for example, as I'm trying to kill these ogres, nothing to stop another player from casting an area of effect route so that I couldn't move and run away from the ogre that was beating me to death. And then also that person would then start healing the ogre. Right? You could do that in Ultima Online. There were no rules against griefing other players. Basically, if you left the cities, good luck. But I mean, you know, that was just Ultima Online. It was a different time. But games like EverQuest, they were massively multiplayer online role-playing games, but they hadn't really put an awful lot of thought into the massively multiplayer part, other than that there were lots and lots of players all trying to do the same things and competing against each other in order to do it. And everything in it was really hard and massively grindy. It's like they forgot that people are supposed to have fun playing games. And World of Warcraft did as well as it did originally because it remembered that people are supposed to be having fun. That doesn't mean that it wasn't insanely grindy and could, you know, at occasions be immensely frustrating. By modern standards, at least. I mean, when the classic servers came online, what, 2 or 3 years ago, with the original vanilla version of World of Warcraft, and everybody was like, oh, it's going to be amazing. No, it wasn't. It was horrible by modern standards. I mean, I had a go on Classic when it first came out, and starting off as a level 1 gnome mage, off you go and kill 12 young boars. Fine, no problem. I've got this. Fire up my frostbolt. I'd get 3 frostbolts off, kill 1 boar, and then I'd have to sit down for 2 minutes regenerating my mana pool before I could cast another frostbolt. This was the level 1 I have just created a character starting experience. Sitting on your ass waiting to be able to do damage is not a fun experience, but that's what it was like. And if you play on the classic server today, that is still what it's like. There were other things that were just stupidly tedious. Like, say, for example, you wanted to fly all the way from the Eastern Kingdoms, say from Eastern Plaguelands, Lightsoap Chapel Flight Point, all the way down to the southern tip of the Eastern Kingdoms, Booty Bay in Stranglethorn Vale. Now, that flight from Flightmaster to Flightmaster, from the northernmost tip of the continent all the way down to the southernmost tip of the continent, would probably take you about 10 minutes of flying time. But it's time that you're not actually doing anything other than sitting on a griffin waiting to get to your destination. So you just go AFK, make a cup of coffee, take the rubbish out, whatever, and when you come back, you're there, you're in Booty Bay. Except that's the way it works now. Back in Classic. Let's say there were 15 interconnected flight points between Lightsoap Chapel in Eastern Plaguelands at the northern end of the continent and Booty Bay and Stranglethorn Vale at the southern end of the continent. Instead of just speaking to the Griffin Master in Eastern Plaguelands and saying, send me to Stranglethorn Vale, it would send you to the Western Plaguelands where it would dismount you. You'd have to speak to the Flight Master again to go to Alterac Valley where it would dismount you. You'd have to speak to the Flight Master again to go to Hillsbrad, where you get the idea. You couldn't even... It's gameplay where you're not actually playing, you're not doing anything, and it wouldn't even let you go AFK throughout that. You had to micromanage every single flight all the way down. That's what Blizzard improved on. And the pinnacle of that improvement, I think most people would agree, would be the Wrath of the Lich King, the second expansion for World of Warcraft, where they got rid of the unnecessary, unfun drudgery. But they hadn't yet, which they would do in further expansions, eliminated the need for all social interaction by providing tools to do everything for you. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to get a group to go and do the level 60 dungeon Scholarments. In Classic, you would basically have to sit in one of the cities, usually Ironforge because it was closer to the dungeon, spamming a chat channel saying, I'm looking for a group for this. And you could be there, particularly if you were a DPS class and not a tank or a healer, you could be there for an hour or more trying to get a group. Now, the plus side was it meant that people actually talked to each other and communicated with each other, but the downside was you could be sitting there for an hour trying to get a group. So in the first expansion, the Burning Crusade, and then in the second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, they introduced this Dungeon Finder tool where you could list yourself in the tool for specific dungeons, and then people could browse the listings looking for people who were trying to do the same dungeons as them, and then send them invitations, and you could all join up together in a group and go off and do the dungeons. That was good, but they improved upon it, and I use the word improve in parenthesis here, later on, because in order to do that, you still had to talk to people. There was still a degree of social interaction going on, and if you're talking to other people, you generally have to be polite when you're talking to other people, you know. Later on, they just removed the need for social interaction whatsoever, because you would just say, right, I want to do this dungeon. You hit the find a group button, and then you'd go and do something else. And then after a minute or 10 minutes, or on a bad day, 20 minutes, a pop-up would appear. A group has been found for your dungeon. Press this button to go. And it would instantly teleport you to the dungeon with the full group. You would never have to speak to each other. And you would just run through this impersonal dungeon, killing everything, collecting the loot, and then you'd all bugger off and go and do your separate things. When you left the group, you teleported straight back to where it was that you were when you joined the group. Now that's massively convenient, but it's also massively impersonal. In Wrath of the Lich King, you could use the tool to browse other people looking for the same groups that you were, but you'd still have to talk to them. There was still an element of social interaction. Why is this so important? Well, when you removed the need to actually communicate with other players, people got... I don't know, this may just be confirmation bias on my behalf, but I have been playing the Burning Crusade Classic for about 2 weeks now in order to get a character ready to start playing Wrath of the Lich King Classic when it comes out today. And I have noticed that under the old systems, people are way nicer, because you do have to communicate with each other, so people mind their manners. And there are no massive server clusters either, with which is again something that happens in modern World of Warcraft, where, for example, you might be on the Hellscream server, but it's all part of a server cluster where everybody in the world can brief from multiple different servers. Because back in the day, if somebody was an utter arsehole, if somebody regularly and consistently acted like a complete cockholster, their name got around, and they would not get invited into groups, and it would make life really hard for them, so they would have to start behaving themselves and stop being a douche 100% of the time. But on these big mega server clusters, you don't have that, because there's people from multiple different servers all playing in whichever layer or instance of the world you happen to be occupying at that specific time, and there's no guarantee you'll ever be on the same instance of the world with them again. So you could blacklist somebody, but if they were from a different server, it made very, very little difference. So there's no real penalty for people being douchebags in modern World of Warcraft, but there was back in the day, because you'd get a reputation for being a douchebag, nobody would group up with you, and you'd find it impossible to get anything done. But in the name of convenience, Blizzard kept introducing these systems that more and more stripped away the need for people to bother being nice to each other. I mean, now, if I'm on the Wrath of the Lich King Classic server and there's a quest boss that I need to kill, and I get there and somebody else is halfway through killing them, I'll say, invite please. That person will instantly throw me an invitation to a group. 100% of the time, every time this will happen, so that I don't have to sit around waiting for them to finish killing it and then sit around for another 2 to 5 minutes waiting for it to respawn and hope that I'm the one that gets the first strike in if anybody else turns up. Because people help each other out. It's just the way things are done on the classic servers. By contrast, when Blizzard started introducing all of these systems that removed the need for people to actually socialize with each other, they had to implement new systems to combat the rising douchebaggery that it created. And these systems are good, and I feel that they are systems that probably should be in a modern RPG, but They're systems that were necessitated by everybody being cockholsters to each other. So now, for example, if there's a quest boss out in the world that I need to kill, and I arrive and somebody else is killing it, I can just help them kill it. I don't have to talk to them to get into a group with them in order to get credit for the kill. It doesn't matter. As long as they're not on the opposite faction. If I'm playing Alliance and an Alliance player is attacking and killing this boss, I can just help them. And I will, as long as I've hit it at least once, I will get credit for it. So they've removed the need for me to socialise with other players in order to get a group quest done. I don't even need to be in a group with another player now in order to get a group quest done. As long as we're both Alliance, or we're both Horde, then we can help each other out. But what did that lead to? That's right. So what does tend to happen now is that if I'm struggling against a quest boss, I'm on my own, and then another player on the same faction turns up who also needs that quest boss, it is not unusual to see them hit that boss once and then step back, sit down, and do nothing. Do nothing whatsoever. They don't need to do any more than that. They've hit it once, they've tagged it. If it dies, they will get credit for it. And if I die fighting it, well, then they can finish it off nice and easy because I've already reduced it to low health. But that's what happens when you eliminate the need for social interaction from your multiplayer games. People no longer feel like they need to bother being polite and considerate to each other because you've removed all of the systems from the game that necessitate their being polite and considerate to each other. And call me old-fashioned, but I am a big fan of people being polite and considerate to each other rather than just descending into needless douchebaggery simply because there's no penalty for not doing so. So I'm looking forward to a bit of Wrath of the Lich King tonight at 11 PM UK time when it goes live. And who knows, maybe I'll bump into some of you there. In the meantime, as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.